All right, so here we are again. Welcome everybody to our 26th SliThEr. It has been quite a ride so far. So I think that this is the first SliThEr in which a former SliThEr has inspired this SliThEr. Am I right about that?
Well, it definitely inspired me, that's for sure.
Yeah, maybe Kyle can weigh in. Is this our first inspirational SliThEr?
I think all of our slithers are inspirational. I don't know if this is the first one that is inspired by a previous slither, but
That's what
possibly
I mean.
is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I am excited to announce we have this will also be an inspirational SliThEr, I'm sure. We have Mitch Anstey from Davidson College, who's going to talk to us about alternative grading strategies. And from that, I will let him take over. And he's got some cool Zoom tactics.
Let's give it a shot, see what it looks like. All right. Hello. Thank you all so much for being here. Shame on me for wearing a green shirt today because I am actually using a green screen behind me. I know it doesn't look green. It's black. It's actually just whatever color my slides are. So I have to wear this hooded sweatshirt to keep my shoulders intact. Otherwise, it's just getting cut off. So anyways, aside from the tech that I'm showing off today, I'm also going to be showing off learning. I'm not an expert in what you're about to hear. I'm not an expert in alternative grading, but I felt really invested after several different moments during the past year. I took a sabbatical, learned a lot, participated in a lot of outreach work, a lot of educational work for my own personal self, and eventually found that I just had enough resources to put in place alternative grading into one specific class. I'd like to do it more, but this one specific class is going to give me the opportunity with kind of training wheels on to be able to make this all happen, hopefully later on. Let me learn. So the class is an upper level inorganic 2 class, mostly about organic metallic chemistry. Just a few students, about 6 students, exactly 6 students. And we also had a discussion, and they let me do this. They were on board, and I think you'll find you'll find in the comments at the end that they actually really love it, and I think I really love it too. So let's talk about it. First things first, like I said, I spent a lot of time educating myself, but in reality, I was learning from a ton of people. Certainly, Barbara Lum, Esther Larison, and Jake Poss are all part of the HHMI Fostering Inclusivity and Respect in Science Together, or the FIRST program here at Davidson. A ton of ways in which I was able to learn about inclusivity in the science curriculum, all the different kind of research that's happening, but also different things that I can put into practice. And I probably attend one or two different types of things every month or so. It's just been great. It also allowed me to have Claire Tobin, former Davidson student, in my classroom for a whole semester, not to look at how well I teach chemistry, but rather how I teach. They were a student. They weren't a chemistry major of any sort, but they were trained and ready to watch me examining how inclusive or not I was throughout the semester. And it was so eye-opening. If you ever have the opportunity to do that, I really would suggest it. It was wonderful. Certainly Santiago Toledo. I'll talk plenty about his influence on me in this kind of scenario. But Katie Matani and Drew Lewis also gave some presentations that helped get me into this. And I guess finally, Heather Blake, another professor here at Davidson in the math department, who is doing alternative grading. And I think it is standards-based grading. Davidson Microaggressions Project is something that I want to shout out, but also I think it's a great program. It's actually a very student-centric program looking at just what is the student experience here at Davidson, specifically for people of color, but anyone who is experiencing microaggressions. That's just been a great way to sort of watch and see what's happening in our community. So maybe one of the very first things where I saw kind of a formal education on alternative grading came from Katie Matani and Drew Lewis, Rogers Williams University and South Alabama, respectively. Katie is in the biology department. Drew is in the math department. They both were using alternative grading. I don't know if I think they're pretty well aligned in what they do, but obviously kind of don't have to be. Where they actually began the whole discussion was this book, Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. They pretty much summarized the book, and so I'm going to do the same. So thanks to them for giving me all the talking points. But now reading through this book, it was just a great first dip into why would I even want to do alternative grading. What they say is that whatever you do, however you want to grade, it should be equitable. It should reflect it should reflect learning. It should be bias resistant, and it should be motivational. And I certainly thought about the first one before any of this happened. Should reflect learning. I should, whatever I want my students to learn, I should be evaluating. I should be assessing that. I then, bias resistance, small things like blind grading, not looking at the names, that sort of stuff. Motivational, I don't know. I don't know if I truly thought directly about that, but it was like more of, here's your feedback. So regardless of that, they said that if equitable grading is doing all of those things, this is probably what you need to be doing to make that happen. I should be clearly specifying my learning outcomes, both for myself and for my students. I should be assessing for proficiency on those learning outcomes and not necessarily giving points. And partial credit ends up being just being an issue. I should reward eventual proficiency. That goes along with this idea of the growth mindset, that when I test should be less important as did they get the content. And then finally, I should allow students to demonstrate their proficiency in different ways. Is a test really the best way for this student specifically to show how they learn? And maybe it's a lab report. Maybe it's just a kind of oral exam or a discussion sometime during office hours. What if that's when the student is most comfortable and at their best? And isn't that what I want? I want my student to show me when they're at their best, what they know. So I guess, I'll go back. I'm going to use those 4 points to structure my talk, but this is kind of where I began. So first off, another big shout out to the Ionic Viper community. Thank you so much, because in addition to that, then I was being inundated by all these videos and seeing people do cool stuff. And it's like, I just want to be doing that too. I really do. And one of the first ones I was able to watch, not live, but later on, was Santiago's presentation, Viper SliThEr 8, Alternative Grading Systems to Support Student Learning. Additionally, he's also published a paper with an economics professor at St. Edward's University that I leaned on. But then I think, and then Viper SliThEr 15 with Benny Chan and Abby O'Connor at TCNJ, New Jersey. What I think was most impressive about this was, oh, wow, chemists are doing this too. I guess I can't say specifically that Benny and Abby are actually doing standards-based grading, but a lot of the content in this talk got me to the point where I was like, I could see them doing this, or at least being proponents of it if they weren't already. So I mean, they were definitely thinking outside the box in different ways to be more inclusive, and I liked that. But Santiago just became my Jedi master. Like I've gone to him numerous times. I ask him all sorts of questions. We've exchanged emails. I've seen his learning outcomes. He's seen mine and given feedback and told me to go back to the drawing board. And I've really appreciated that. And that's I think the biggest part of how Viper has benefited me recently. It's just having access to some really great educators. So again, these are the 4 different pieces of my talk. So let's jump into it. Learning outcomes. These are the learning outcomes from my Gen Chem course. They are, I don't read it. Just don't read it. You can, if you want, you can pause the video, check it out later. But I think the most important piece that I want to get across in this is that is a general chemistry course where we're taking a ton of different topics. I mean, I'm over the course of the semester, I'm teaching 15 chapters. I only have 6 learning outcomes. Now, these learning outcomes are pretty general, and they are all very important ideas. But even in the sort of preamble up at the very top, while there are numerous specific outcomes involving learning, relating, applying all of these things, these are overarching learning goals of the course. Yeah. So it's acknowledging that we haven't specified these learning outcomes for you, the student. Hopefully we specified them for ourselves as the educators, though. But I think when I take these learning outcomes, I can't plan my day-to-day with them. I can plan and assess maybe an entire semester's worth of work upon those learning outcomes, but I can't help my students in the moment, and I can't help myself when I'm trying to teach gas laws right then and there. So I think these learning outcomes, when they remain too broad, they become less helpful. So what do? Well, you start reading. So Santiago had talked about Marzanos Taxonomy of learning. Specifically, it's a taxonomy of educational objectives. I mean, that's the title. But these 2 books are actually really cool to read as a maybe a non-psychologist or like a non-learner. Oops, sorry. I love that my whole world is all connected to my computer, so I can get dinged constantly by text messages. Sorry. Marzanos Taxonomy, these books actually end up sort of dunking on Bloom's taxonomy the whole time. I know they didn't really mean to. There are really some really good things about Bloom's taxonomy, in that it was maybe the very first time when learning was highlighted as being multidimensional. That like learning happens in many different ways, and you can assess learning maybe in different ways or express learning in different ways. But what they really say in these 2 books, the authors, is that they're not great for designing learning outcomes. Sure, maybe they're great for synonym bank, but there were actually even studies done, 3 separate studies, 1957, 72, and 75, where they took experts, trained educators in Bloom's taxonomy, and they were given some questions, and they said, assess them according to the taxonomy, that the like pyramid that you usually see with Bloom's, and they couldn't do it. There was no correlation between the actual maybe difficulty of the question and where it was on that pyramid. And I think that's a problem, because if you can do things at the top of the pyramid before you can do things at the bottom, then that's not the pyramid. You have something different. So this helped me think about, specifically from an educational or learning outcomes perspective, what should my students be doing? And specifically taking one concept and walking it up to the top of the pyramid, or maybe we'll stop talking about pyramids, talk about maybe an arrow. This actually came from Santiago's paper not too long ago, that there are 4 levels of cognition: retrieval, sort of memorization aspect. And there's comprehension, analysis and knowledge utilization. I think the first three tend to happen in almost every course. Knowledge utilization is much more about experimentation and answering unanswered questions or finding new questions to answer. So those often happen maybe at a grad school level, or in the case of my class, actually, we're doing maybe a cure in a way. And so I can get to that knowledge utilization level. Santiago's really excited about that because we haven't seen that yet. But so with those ideas in mind, let's see. Let's consider the 18 electron rule in organometallic or inorganic chemistry. Just retrieval level of the 18 electron rule is, do you know what it is? That however you count your electrons, you have to get to 18, and then you've satisfied the 18 electron rule. Can you say that? Have you memorized it? Can you recall it when somebody asks you? You don't have to know how to explain it, though. You don't have to know the reasons why. Comprehension then gets into that. You have memorized it, but can you express the 18 electron rule in a different way? Symbolizing or integrating. Can you draw it for me in some way? Why is it, can you show the S, P, and D orbitals as having 18 positions, and so that's related to that. But then when you get to analysis, then it's like, can you point to several complexes that have satisfied it? Can you generalize it from a molecular orbital standpoint situation? Can you then rationalize exceptions or how someone did it the wrong way, analyzing errors? And so it's sort of, you have to have memorized it to get to beyond that. You have to be able to know it well enough to symbolize it, and then to be able to pick it apart comes at the analysis level. So I think it works really well. So then this organometallics course, I took all my learning outcomes and I just began to crank on them and really expand them, taking one idea and bringing it from essential concepts or the retrieval level through all the way up to knowledge utilization. Everything should stand on top of the next. And then after you did that one, then you had to do the second one, because that's only two. And then 1, 3, 4, and 5. And there's lots. There's just so much. It took a long time. It was really fun, though, and really satisfying, though, to do this. Because, look at it. That's a lot of stuff. I really did just I looked off into space, making you think I looked at those learning outcomes. But this is something I can plan my day around. This is something I can plan a problem set, a lab experiment, certainly a test. One whole test would just be on learning outcome 1. Another whole test could be on learning outcome 2 or 3 or 4. And the students get to see very clearly what it is I want them to do. And then when it comes to grading, we check them off. So there isn't necessarily partial credit for getting an essential concept. We can either say very conclusively, yes, I believe, I'll go back with the 18 electron rule. Yes, I understand. I can explain the representation of molecular of transition metal complexes using the concept of electronics and sterics. Yes, I can classify ligands as sigma and pi donors, sigma or and pi acceptors. So then there's no longer this issue of, is the grade how much of your grade is related to partial credit? So let's consider, I think I'm about to get to that later. All right. So what I then do is, with each of those learning outcomes, we're going through class. Students are showing me in their different ways, but specifically still on tests, like classical things. Yes, they understand this concept, but I am assessing maybe more holistically now. I don't care necessarily that they got a minus sign wrong. because that could just be a calculator error or whatever. That shouldn't really detract if they can still show me like, yes, they were using the right equation, or yes, they were explaining it the right way. Then great, awesome. Let's just check that one off. You did a good job. And so by the end, I'm averaging the performance over that. And so students can still miss several things and get great grades. And I think that's the idea. So now maybe assessing for proficiency. I'm kind of was jumping ahead a little bit. This is maybe the biggest change in how I structure, I don't know, how I think about my problem sets and my tests now. So here is a question. Here's what I used to do in my Gen Chem course. It is a multi-step problem, and it builds on top of the, from A to B to C to D. And, I used to look at this problem and go like, yeah, this is really cool. We're showing in real time how science is interconnected. I'm asking students to do many different kinds of things that scientists usually will do anyways. But the problem here is that when the student is going in, yes, they are going to have to show me that they can do all of this stuff. But what if they actually don't end up knowing the charge in coulombs? I mean, they didn't have to memorize it. I mean, just above, I gave the charge of the electron in coulombs. I wanted them to be able to know that the charge of the proton is equal but opposite in sign. But what if they miss that? How are they going to do part C? Well, yeah, I'm sure you would do the same as me. Just use a wrong number. As long as you show me that you're using the equation the right way, then everything's great. But now they have anxiety. Now they're worried. Now the math is going to get weird. Now I need to grade a problem that I don't actually know the answer for. So I'm going to have to maybe bust out my calculator and do that math. I'm making my life a little bit harder and making them more nervous and question their knowledge when I really just want them to keep going. That I think that's actually a problem. So how would I change this problem? Well, I would most likely just not make it laddered or dependent on each other. Yes, I can definitely assess all of those things. They just don't have to be so integrated that I cause other issues beyond assessment. And this problem actually could end up being a good one. It could be a situation where one of my learning outcomes is actually integrating knowledge or integrating other concepts with one another. But I would have to spell that out, and I wouldn't assess, nuclear structure, doing moles and Avogadro's number calculations at the same time as that other learning outcome. I would make sure that I assessed them individually and then debut this problem where they can do all of that stuff they've shown me. And then I say, can you integrate it? And then that's a totally different assessment. So that's maybe the biggest thing that I learned through this process, just that I'm assessing inefficiently and maybe even in a way to stack the deck against the students. So Heather Blake in our math department here at Davidson, this is from her syllabus. This is how she assesses each problem, each section, each learning outcome, that you go from F for fluent, which I don't know, maybe just trying to be funny with F is the best, but fluency. Can you say, yes, I own this. I totally understand this. And I can understand it in familiar ways, like things from the textbook or lecture, and then new situations. So a brand new topic, when a new setting. Heather also has two other sub levels, needs work and progressing. I feel like personally, both of those are similar to me. And they are both phrased in a very growth mindset way where, yes, you're getting better. They're communicating how much more work the professor thinks the student needs to do to get to fluency. Santiago would look at it more as just a yes or no question. Are you fluent or are you still progressing? And I'm doing that too. It's either yes, we've checked it off, or no, we haven't. And here is the feedback though. And Heather, Santiago, and all of these folks that do this are just giving lots of good pointed feedback, but not assigning points to it. Just, this is why this was wrong. Here's what you should do next time, or come talk to me. Let's sort it out. Because I see other integrated issues, whatever it might be. The feedback is the biggest part, and it's not tied to points. The student's grade on that assignment is not locked in at that point. They can still get better and learn from that feedback, which rewards eventual proficiency. But so this is another neat part of it, that the flexibility is built into the system. In Heather's class, in this linear algebra class, she has outlined 22 different learning outcomes for the class. And each one has opportunities for assessment throughout the semester. The first 4 are being assessed January through March. You can still get them. And then if you don't get them, then you still have an opportunity on the final. So there is kind of an end point. Yes, like before you leave the class, you do have to have tried to show, like, we just can't extend it that much further. But that's 4 months instead of just 1 month or 2 weeks. That can be a big deal, especially with how integrated many of the concepts are that we're teaching in other classes. You just get to put these concepts into a new light that maybe the student finally goes, oh, that's what you were saying. But they can now say that even after the first test and still be able to get a great grade or show proficiency, maybe is what I want to say now. But this is a lot of work. I mean, there are there's 7 moments of assessment here. And they're pretty formal assessments though. It's still a test type of situation. And this takes work and it takes coordination. And I totally respect this. And I see myself eventually doing this. But I just know that it's tough. And it can be one of the reasons why maybe a lot of folks might not want to do this right away, why the whole thing seems intimidating. So if you can't do that, if you can't create these tests, what you can do is maybe allow students to show proficiency in different ways. And that's what I've opted for in my organometallics class right now. I'm giving tests, I'm giving problem sets, and all of that they've seen before and they're comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it too. But the great thing is, even after that test, they know they still have opportunities because they have a lab report coming up. And a lot of those concepts are going to show up in their lab report discussion section. Or maybe they have to decode an NMR and show me they understand where to find certain signals. They understand experimental design in some way. Like, why did we choose these ligands over those ligands? Well, because we're going to get to the 18 electron rule. So you need to hit that learning outcome. Talk about it in your discussion. Do that. Just go for it. But actually, just the other day, I had a student who had gotten feedback on their problem set. They had seen the feedback and they were like, oh, I'm counting electrons in a wrong way. And it was just one issue, but it showed up in numerous different places. And once I gave that feedback, they came back to my office just to make sure that they were doing it the right way now. And I said, that was the only issue I saw here. If you didn't have that, I would have checked off, this other box. So can you do it? Here's a problem. I gave them 2 problems. And I left them alone for about 5 minutes. They came back, they worked it on the board for me. I had them talk it through the whole time, just like, a qualifying exam, like, or your PhD defense. And I was totally satisfied that we had figured out what was going on. And then I went straight to my grade book and checked it off, let them know, printed them out so they could see all the things they've checked out and haven't checked out. And that was it. It was great. It was easy and effortless, and they were comfortable with it. And so was I. I didn't have to wait for another test to have them show me now that we have fixed it. So now you can just imagine, yes, test problem sets and lab reports, but also literature discussions, office hours. There are just so many other opportunities for assessment now that they can be really fruitful. So now, what do my students think? There was actually a really interesting comment that one of my students said about my learning outcomes. After I took all this effort, I was very happy that they liked it, but they liked it for a very specific reason. We've been going through this pandemic for a while. It's affected the learning environment, affected the students' ability to just crank on work. And they had taken an organic one with a different person. So they worried about different expectations when they came to my class. They just weren't sure what they needed to know and what they didn't need to know. And they felt like these learning outcomes helped that. So listing specific learning objectives turns a seemingly impossible task of filling in the gaps into a very doable one. If I'm having trouble mastering one of the objectives, I know in what foundational areas I need to review. I totally didn't think about that aspect, about a student coming into the class wondering what it is, like what level they needed to start the class at to then progress further. But I mean, it is there. If they see words on there, like metathesis or oxidative addition or like, they know they're going to have, if they recognize those words, but then go, oh, wait, I don't actually know what that is. Well, already that's a clue. Let's check it out. I love that. So another person says, for myself, it's just extremely helpful to see the learning outcomes explicitly written out with the exact details of what each outcome consists of. Another student said, standards-based grading was slightly confusing and intimidating upon first hearing about it. However, after being graded with this technique after a few weeks, I can truly say I've had the experience, or the time and experience, to trust this technique. That made me feel really good when I got that feedback, because I expected the confusion and the intimidation, and I honestly wasn't sure if they were going to let me do it. I was definitely going to just do normal grading, but if they agreed, we would go down this route. And despite their reluctance, I think I made a good case that I was doing it for their benefit as much as mine, but maybe more so for their benefit. And I'm glad that they have had a good experience so far. And finally, greatest piece of feedback, 9 out of 10. I'm reading that as 9 out of 10. I hope it's like not 9/10 of 1 out of 10, because then maybe that's not what they intend. But anyways, 9 out of 10 is how I'm reading it. And so what do I think? Let me get my notes here. I think I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to do this. I think it's important. I think it's something I'm going to be doing much further on in the future, or with my other courses, once I figure out how to do it in something that's not, I don't know, that's just has more students. How can I manage all of the eventual proficiency points? So I think that's probably the biggest issue. I can do it for a small class, and I can do it for students who kind of already know me and trust me, but can I do it with first year students? Are they really going to trust me? Are they going to be totally on board? And I don't know. And I probably need to just have a situation that's locked down. As for what else I need to do? I think I actually need to be more focused on when I allow students to show me proficiency. I'm sitting there at any moment in the class where I ask a question, and then I'm like, oh, did they just show me proficiency? Are they fluent yet? And that's very distracting when I'm trying to teach. But then if I don't do that, then I come back to my office and I'm going, oh, I missed a moment. Like they could have, like that was it. I probably could have said, yes, you got it. I just need to agree on when it's going to happen, probably both for the student's benefit as well as mine. But overall, I mean, I think the last piece I want to say is that I chose chemistry because I had excellent teachers, and those teachers were also terrific mentors. And I don't think I was especially gifted in chemistry. I was just motivated by those people, and I motivated myself to spend more time. I want to be that for somebody else. And I hope that this is one of those avenues where folks will come into the course and say, I can do chemistry. That would feel so good. And then to be able to show at the end, yes, you do chemistry. You are a chemist if you want to be. And I think this is the right environment to make that happen. So I really, if anybody sees this, I really want you to get in touch with me, not because I'm an expert, but I can get you in touch with other people if that's what you want. You can ask about my learning outcomes. I'm probably going to post these on Viper pretty soon. But I would love to hear what your feedback is and what what your questions are. So thank you all so much, and have a great one.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mitch. So I think that we have a good amount of time to discuss. I was hoping that we could have a discussion about like maybe what other people are doing, and maybe get some advice or and feedback from you, Mitch. So do we have any questions for Mitch right now? I think Adam put something in the chat.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say, first of all, I did specs grading last spring after watching Santiago's SliThEr with much less prep. I just sort of threw it together. And so I didn't do the learning goals list that I think is critical to do this well. I did something similar, although I didn't divide them out into the different categories. So in the chat I asked if you'd be willing to share those learning goals, like maybe on Viper or one-on-one, just to sort of see how you assess those the four different levels. And I was having some issues here, so I didn't quite hear that. It's sort of that revamped Bloom's taxonomy. But I really like specs grading, and I took a bunch of notes on this, and I'm really looking forward to expanding out my learning goals for the spring. Again, I think doing this in a small class of 20 students is going to be way better than starting with 150 students, but I'm really curious to see how it goes the second time around, especially, this question is turning into a dialogue, a monologue. The way I did it is I just I kept the same quiz exam structure, which I don't recommend. And I've told a lot of people not to do that. And I think the thing that I didn't do that I would do now is the office hours, the lab reports, showing me that proficiency one-on-one counts as much as it would on an exam. Because what I really care about is if you learn the stuff, not that you got it on a test. And that's a real change in my brain of how I think about teaching. So I really appreciate this a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. So Marzanos Taxonomy is what you can Google to find it. And there are 2 books associated with it. The first was a book that just explained the taxonomy and how it was built for educators. And then the follow-on book was designing it's like behind me somewhere, but designing objectives for whatever. So I read the first one and then the next one to actually begin to craft them myself and to pull them out. And then I just needed Santiago's, I guess, expert opinions as to how did I actually follow it, because I wasn't following it very, very well. But yeah, I think when you actually have them finally written, they should be clear enough to you that, at least they are clear enough to me, that when I just read them again, I'm like, yeah, they either have it or they don't. So the 18 electron rule, I think, keeps coming up, that I keep thinking about it because it has a really nice through line. That, do you know the 18, like what the 18 electron rule is? Can you just tell me? But then that comprehension level is, can you give me a molecular orbital rationale for why the 18 electron rule is what it is? Can you then justify the exceptions to the 18 electron rule based on that molecular orbital rationale? Continuing to sort of move that way, and those are built into my learning outcomes. And so those statements are just so easy for me to look back and say, yes, they did know that. They can say,
Mitch, I have a question. So when you develop these learning outcomes that you were going to implement in your course, did you do it before the course started, or did you do it along the way? Because I found when I started doing this, it was easier for me to do it along the way, because I think more clearly when it's, well, we've done this, so this is where we're headed. So therefore, this is what I expect, right? So I was just wondering how you did that.
I think, well, so I did do them before the class began. What I didn't want to do was jump into this, ask my students for to have the benefit of the doubt that I'm just going to make it work, but then not show that I've done very much work to assess them. I feel like they should have rebelled if I was going to tell them I'm going to grade you on something, but I don't actually have the list of things I'm going to grade you on. I think that would have been problematic just from them buying in. But I have taught the course before. And so I knew what flow of the content I had. I knew already what I had assessed previously. And I knew the things that I thought were important at each point in the class already. And so then it just took me time to write them all down in a very, very detailed way. And then also think critically about, like, is this truly what I want them to do? Or is this, not actually a learning outcome? Are these interdependent or not? That's where like a lot more time was spent. But yeah, I think also, Santiago's best advice to me was just to make sure that there was a through line from retrieval to comprehension to analysis to the knowledge utilization, that each one of those built on each other. And I wasn't asking my students to do something that they hadn't yet done the previous cognition level prep for. If they couldn't tell me the definition of the 16 electron rule, then I wasn't going to ask them to talk about the MOs of that just yet. That would be the general idea.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Mitch today?
I will share my LOs. Now, this I mentioned this is an inorganic 2 class. So this is it's titled organometallics. So I imagine I will take a lot of the retrieval content sort of stuff, and I will then maybe work backwards from there for my inorganic 1 course. How could this be just a basic idea in inorganic 2, but kind of the ultimate goal in my inorganic 1 course? How do I get to that point? So I'm looking forward to doing that, I think, in my inorganic 1 course. Still, Gen Chem, I think the way it's structured, it's just so big. I'm still really intimidated, but I think it's important. So I want to get it done at some point.
But I think seeing even just one example, say like 18 electron rule, like I can sort of see that one, but seeing how that really just gets laid out, even one or two examples would be like, oh yeah, now I sort of see how to do this. And that's absolutely not what I had. I mean, I just sort of had my class, my daily goals. It was a mess.
You were trying something, I mean, that's what happens the first time. And that's like why I feel like I should be more gracious with the way I grade, because I know the students are thinking that too. Cynthia, I saw your hand go up.
With Gen Chem, I have been using Alex, and it is wonderful for specifications grading. I think it's small chunk topics. I can group them under a learning outcome, and Alex does all the heavy lifting with the grading, and students can work it at their own pace. So it is much less expensive than it was 10 years ago. So I don't know if that is an option if you want to keep your POGL, which I think is wonderful. But Alex may be an option for a Gen Chem without much of a redo.
Can you say what Alex is? I've never heard of that before.
It's like a homework system, and it's from McGraw-Hill, but it is adaptive and personalized.
Great, yeah.
And it's iterative. So students, I can give you the link.
Perfect.
Yes, there it is.
With a K, Alex with a KS.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people use it. So you could just, or if Cynthia wants to put up a link, just Google Alex, it'll come up.
Awesome. That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Cynthia, question about that. Does Alex have to be linked to a particular textbook, or is it completely separate?
I think you can do it separately. We are using the Flowers OpenStax book. So we don't love the textbook, but we love Alex. That's how we're making that work. But I do believe that it works a little bit better if it is linked, because then it will put a build of problems in for you, and you don't have to build it out from scratch the first time, which is nice.
That's good to hear. Graham, I see your hand up. Good to see you. Good.
Yeah, likewise. How are you?
I'm great.
Hey, so I'm curious about the parts of this that you might be able to take away rather than implementing fully standards-based grading in your Gen Chem classes, which maybe is too much overhead to make it work. But I'm thinking about the portions you talked about, especially for some reason, the last one having multiple opportunities or vehicles for demonstrating proficiency. Do you have any thoughts about how you could apply that to a Gen Chem, a larger size class?
That's a good point. I mean, I think so what I do know is that some folks here at Davidson, when they give a test, I kind of do something similar to this. You give a test, you give feedback, the test goes back to the student, and then you ask the student to actually rework all the problems that they missed. Now, then what do you do with that return assignment? Some folks will actually say, you've just fixed everything you needed to fix, and assuming that you did it in the same way all by yourself, maybe with a little bit of the feedback that I've given you, that changes your grade for the better. And that is maybe one easy way to show that you believe in growth mindset in the students, and not actually have to craft something brand new. I think like, or instead of having it be students working on the problem set all by themselves, they could come into your office and work on the problem with you, and then you give points back that way. You're still trying to like hold on to that standard grading style, but move to something that allows for eventual proficiency. But I don't know if you still have points involved, you're still going to run into that partial credit situation, and that may or may not what you really want ultimately.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. We do exam regrades sometimes in our courses here. And, you know, I think one of the other issues we see there is when you think about the equity side of things, you're kind of further burdening the students who are already having trouble, you know, with prerequisite materials or other challenges, you know, being on the same footing. So I feel I'm looking for ways to, you know, broaden the opportunities. So yeah, I'm not sure, you know, is there some way you could, you know, alternatives to exams or alternative exam questions? Anyway, maybe this is a, you know, question for future SliThERs or something like that, but it's sparked some thinking in me. So thanks for that.
It was interesting the way you phrase that about burdening the students. You know, I haven't thought about it that way because I don't want to think about that as punishment. The students are there, and as long as they didn't receive like a negative result that couldn't be resurrected, I feel like any one person would find themselves in a situation where, like, I got sick that day, I had a bad test performance, I didn't have any other option than to take that test. If I just did it on a different day, that'd be great. You know, I give exams now as all my exams are take home. All my exams are untimed. Well, not really untimed. I'm like, you get 4 hours to do a 1 hour exam. You cannot spend any more than that. That's the sort of thing. And I give them 5 days to do it. If they are sick, they hopefully have recovered by the 5th day to take it. That's like another way that I try to sort of steer clear of the other biases that might be happening.
And when
yeah,
you
you're
do
right.
that,
I was struggling for the words too with the burden thing. I wasn't exactly
Yeah.
sure what to use in that case, so I wasn't. But yeah, I just we're struggling with workload issues with some of our Gen Chem classes, and
Yeah.
I think that's the thing we're really trying to be cognizant of, is not overdoing it on the workload.
Yeah, totally see that. Carrie, what were you going to say?
So when you have those multiple opportunities, do you, for tests, let's say, do you do that in class, or do you have that like on your LMS?
I do not grade that way. Heather Blake in the math department is doing it that way. I think Santiago is also doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So from Heather's perspective in her math class, her linear algebra class, I am fairly certain that across the first 3 exams that are given, that she's testing the same idea with different kinds of problems. And I don't know, I think it is kind of like paper and pen sort of thing. But that the students, if they know they've already checked it off, they open up the exam and flip right on past it to get to the next one. But I could definitely see a cool LMS module where you just have this, like maybe some randomized set of questions that are all tuned to a certain LO learning outcome, and then they can just turn the crank when they want to. You can limit the number of attempts overall. So yeah, I can see like technology, I think, is going to be a really good way, especially with adaptive assignments, like Cynthia was saying with Alex. It's going to be the way to make this work in much larger classroom scenarios.
Yeah, so we started doing it in general chemistry, and it's really helped to have Blackboard tests. We have Blackboard, so so they can just really do it whenever they want. And then it fulfills a certain SLO. So that might be helpful if you want to start doing the same thing in Gen Chem, where you have so many students that you wouldn't have to take up class time to do it. You would just have it, on your LMS.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's a really cool one. I thank you for that inspiration.
All right. Do we have any more questions for Mitch today? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who joined us for our 26th SliThER, everybody.